Brothers and sisters in Christ, today we commemorate the birthday of St. Faustina. Actually, no. We commemorate the birthday of the person who was to become St. Faustina. Saints are not born. They are created over time. You might have seen the t-shirt or the sign on the wall in somebody's cubicle at work that says, "Please be patient with me, God is not done with me yet." It is a process of divine mercy working in and through us. And one of the fundamental virtues that is needed in the process of becoming holy is humility. St. Benedict in his rule notes that humility is the first step in the ladder towards holiness. We see this humility in the second reading where Paul, as Father Darius this morning noted, proclaims himself the very least of all the holy ones. He knows the journey that he's gone through. He knows the mercy that he's experienced. Albeit he was very highly educated, spirit-filled, but ready to follow God's will wherever he saw it, wherever it may lead. The ultimate act of humility was described in today's gospel. Jesus on the cross. The essence of humility, being ready to do the will of God wherever it may lead us, wherever it led him to death on the cross. He was ready to do his Father's will. It is in that trust of the Father's plan that he exemplifies our road. And he exemplifies the filial relationship to the Father that Jesus demonstrates for us. As Father Rory this morning said, Father's faithfulness to his fatherhood, quoting John Paul II. And in the second reading, St. Paul says the same. I kneel before the Father from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named. It is our relationship to the Father through Jesus that is our road to holiness and has been the road to holiness for every saint that has lived. The history of the image of divine mercy, and in particular, the original image of divine mercy is a study in that humility. In Faustina's diary, in her history, we know that she was the gardener, worked in the kitchen, worked as the porter or doorman. Blessed Michael Sopoćko describes her as a member of the second choir of the uneducated sisters. She did not have a great education. Her superiors spoke of her as a typically devout young sister, but also very shy, which surprised her confessor, Blessed Michael Sopoćko, because that was the last word that he would have used to describe St. Faustina. When she was talking about Jesus or about the apparitions, she was anything but shy. She was assertive, she was demanding, because she was not in herself or about herself. She was also very often unsure about what God wanted. And she needed and begged God for the assistance of a spiritual director. But once she knew the will of God, once she was sure that that's what Jesus wanted from her, no effort was spared, and she was never stopped. We saw this again in the life of St. Teresa of Calcutta, a young, small, religious woman who once she knew what God wanted of her, once she was sure of the will of God, nothing would stop her. And there's a second player in this preparation of this picture, which was Blessed Sopoćko. He was the professor, the educated one. He taught at university, he taught in seminary. He was the counselor and spiritual director for very many sisters. He was the wise one, but ended up being guided by or through a humble, uneducated nun. That, my brothers and sisters, takes a lot of humility. And so the time came to realize Jesus' request to paint the image. It was a mutual process of 4 individuals: St. Faustina, Father Sopoćko, the painter Eugene Kazimierowski, and Jesus. The 4 of them worked in a way that I don't believe has ever been duplicated. This was the only image of divine mercy that St. Faustina ever saw while she was alive. There are hundreds of images, many of them on sale in the back, of divine mercy. But this one is unique and very particular. St. Faustina required total editorial control. She would have it no other way. The first person that Father Sopoćko approached to paint the image was a Bernardine sister who had already was known as an accomplished artist. And she had agreed to take initial directions from St. Faustina, but being an artist, or perhaps artiste, she wanted to have artistic control over the project. And St. Faustina said no. So Blessed Michael found his neighbor next door. They were living in diocesan-provided housing, and Kazimierowski was doing paintings for the diocese. And they approached him and said, "Would you take on this project? But Sister has to tell you exactly what it's supposed to look like, and you have to agree with it." And so he agreed to cooperate in the painting of this painting. And there were some details that were absolutely mandatory. Father Sopoćko took copious notes. He participated in the sessions, and amongst the things that were required that Sopoćko noted, there had to be a dark background. He had thought the possibility of the cenacle door might be okay, and Sister said, no, the dark background. The person of Jesus was dressed in a pure white robe, moving forward, coming towards me. Then he stopped with his left foot forward. His right hand was at shoulder level, held there as if in blessing. His left hand touching the robe at the point of his wounded heart, from where the red and pale rays fell downwards, spreading out over the ground beneath, his eyes gazing down as from the cross. As we were producing the film, one of the people who spoke was an art historian and a church historian. And she commented to me afterwards the detail of the picture. The rest of the picture was painted quite quickly, but extreme detail and repainting was done over the face and the hands. They were extremely important to Faustina. Faustina's demands were not always explicitly understood by her spiritual director. When Sister Faustina first explained the image she had seen in her vision and spoke of the rays that were coming from the area of the heart, Father Sopoćko did not understand what she meant, and he felt a bit uneasy about including them in the painting of Jesus. So before he went any further with the painting, he asked her to ask Jesus to explain the meaning of the rays. When he heard the explanation, he knew he could relate this to the gospel, and he was at ease. In his answer to St. Faustina, Jesus said they represented blood and water that flowed from his wounded heart, and his body was pierced by a lance on the cross. At first, Father Sopoćko understood the color of the rays to be red and white, but then he realized these colors were in common with the Polish flag, and this could be misinterpreted by the church and state authorities, which in fact they were. That was one of the reasons the diary was banned. That was one of the reasons it took so long. But on further questioning of Sister Faustina, she insisted that the light ray was colorless. He therefore had to ensure that the painter would make every effort to show this ray as white, not as white, but as colorless. How he was going to achieve this, he did not know, but as an artist, it was sure he would find a way. And the artist, in fact, achieved this by making our Lord's robe visible through the pale rays. Father Sopoćko, this professor, this well-renowned and respected man, puts on an alb and serves as the model for the picture. St. Faustina tells him where the hand is, how it's supposed to look. Kazimierowski goes back and over and over. This is an exercise in humility for Faustina, for Sopoćko, and for Kazimierowski. It's not what they intended, but what the Lord intended us to see. And it did not end there. On July 28, 1934, the picture is completed. And Father Sopoćko pays for the painting and takes it back to his room in his apartment next to St. Michael's Church, where he's the rector. And all of a sudden, he gets word sometime later from St. Faustina that Jesus said the painting should not be where it was, but should be exposed for public veneration. I'm starting to really feel for Father Sopoćko. He's gone through the process of helping create the painting, and now this nun is telling him, you didn't put it in the right place. Somebody comes up with the idea of exposing it for veneration in the shrine of our Mother of Mercy, Ostra Brahma, the Gates of Dawn, the image that's hanging on the back wall of this church. He's thinking that's probably not a very good idea. There's a small chapel with a very famous image, and putting a second image there probably won't work. And he gets invited to preach over what would later become Divine Mercy Weekend at that shrine. And he's going to preach on mercy, and he has the image exposed up adjacent to the shrine so people could see it over the street. So the first place it's exposed is in this shrine. And what does he do after that? Takes it back to his apartment. So in December 1935, St. Faustina told him once again that the painting should be made available for the public. Father Sapochko appeals to his bishop to be allowed to permanently display it in St. Michael's Church, but it was not until 1937 that he finally received permission to do it. Patience. It gets displayed there. They call the bishop assigns the chancellor to create a commission to see if it's a fitting image of Jesus to display in a church. On April 2nd, the commission and the chancellor give their decision to the bishop. The bishop quickly gives his agreement, and it is hung with two conditions. It cannot be in the main altar of the church, and the origin of the painting may not be made public. So Father Michael then hangs it on the right side of the altar. It is hung up in 1937. It has begun to be venerated there, and then its journey commences when that church is closed. The painting gets hidden away, and only 50 years later do we find out where the first image is. It is brought back and it is displayed in Vilnius. The process of this one image, the humility of all the people involved, is quite great. And it is a lesson for us. The way to holiness, the way to receive the mercy that God gives us, is through humility. Allowing God to work in us when we don't understand what God's plan for us is. That trust. The trust in divine providence that God has a plan, even when it looks pretty absurd to us sometimes. That God has a plan for our lives and the world. That God is ready to extend his mercy and move us into holiness. Let us take the example of St. Faustina and Blessed Michael, Father Michael, to let the Lord use us to create the image of his mercy in the world today, that we too may become instruments and apostles of his mercy. Amen.